When you get hold of the Nintendo Entertainment System. When you master Rob the video robot and meet the challenge of Gyromite. When you shoot the light-sensing zapper. When you play the system with the most arcade hits, you're playing with power. The Nintendo Entertainment System. Now you're playing with power.
Hey everyone, welcome to Tables to Stage. I'm Jordan Worma. So, if you grew up in the 70s and 80s, like I did, you probably remember those old Nintendo Power commercials. Even if you didn't play the games yourself, they were on every Saturday morning, and certainly between the afternoon shows when you got home from school. Almost everyone from my generation has some kind of relationship with video games, whether it's because you were fortunate enough to be able to own your own Nintendo Entertainment System, or you had a friend that would begrudgingly share a controller, or maybe it was a Sega Master System. Sorry if that's the case. And even if playing games wasn't something you were able to do for whatever reason, awareness of the gaming revolution was pretty universal. Most gamers of that generation were obsessed with graphics or action, but for Ed Wilson of the VGMbassy podcast, it was the music that really grabbed hold of his imagination. So Ed is a big part of the video game music fan community that has been growing as music has become more readily available due to something called, let me see if I get this right, the internet. The VGMbassy is Ed's second VGM-based podcast, and it provides some interesting insight into the impact that VGM has on those who embrace it. Now, I have been playing games casually since, I guess, the early 80s, and as often as not, I've been playing with the volume muted. So apparently I've missed some pretty incredible music while trying to sneak in my own game time. So Ed's story is interesting because while it parallels my own experience recording Guns N' Roses or Michael Jackson or Heavy D songs from my boombox tape deck, pause, record, crap, I missed it, wait for the song to come on the radio again, rinse, repeat. Okay, so no pre-roll sales pitches today. We're just going to get right to me and Ed from his basement studio/game room. All right, so are you originally from this area, or did you migrate from somewhere else?
Yeah, I'm born and raised in Hamden, Connecticut. I've lived here my entire life. I spent 1 year of my life in North Haven, which is the neighboring town. But other than that, yeah,
really
Hamden.
Far afield there, huh?
Exactly, it's one town over. So, but yeah, I've been here forever, 40 years.
Wow. Okay, what is it about this area that keeps you here?
Mostly family, I think.
Yeah.
You know, and Hamden just has always felt like home.
Yeah.
It's got really kind of everything you need. It's close to Yale. It's right next to New Haven, so you get all the arts from New Haven.
Oh, yeah.
You get all the nice like hiking and stuff from Sleeping Giant. There's just so much here to do that you never really feel bored. And then you've got Mystic and all the vacation spots along the shoreline that's not too far from us.
Oh, yeah, it's a good location.
Yeah, and lots of jobs, too.
Did you get to enjoy all that stuff? Like, as a kid growing up here, you were able to visit all those places?
Right, yeah. My dad was a Yale alumnus, so we would go to the Yale Bowl games. We got football and hockey and all these great college sports nearby.
Yeah.
So
go Bulldogs, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Go Blue. It was never ending around here.
That's cool. So if you've got all these other things around, how'd you end up in front of the TV playing video games so much?
Well, my parents had big full-time jobs. I mean, my mom was a teacher, so she was always out of the house. My younger brother, Brendan, was 2.5 years younger than me, so we were really close in age. And he got, for his birthday in 1986, a Nintendo Entertainment System. And because we were so close in age and kind of similar in skill level to games, we always had each other to play with.
Yeah.
So, my parents would work all day, and then we'd come home from school, and we'd get our homework done, and then we'd just sit downstairs in our bedroom, and we'd play some Super Mario Brothers or whatever, and we just kept each other company. I had other friends and stuff that I would play with, but mostly it would be going over to their houses and playing video games too. So,
is there a better video game in history than Super Mario Brothers for two brothers to compete against each other with?
Yeah. Well, the thing about Super Mario Brothers is that both of us got so good at it from playing it so much that it's not like you alternate levels. So it's like when I beat level 1-1 and I go on to level 1-2, and then I would it would be like a half an hour. I'd still be playing, and my brother would be looking at me like, "Can you just die on purpose so I can get my turn?" So after a while, that got a little annoying. We'd start playing games that we had, simultaneous play or something like that. But we always got along well enough that we would be able to play games together and have fun.
Yeah. What other games on the NES did you guys spend a lot of time on?
Oh, man. So ice hockey was a big one.
That was a great one.
Yeah, we used to love competing against each other in that. We had track and field 2, and that was a game where you had to tap the buttons really fast. So we got those.
That was really big for a while. They had
those big arcade joysticks.
Isn't that the one they had the floor pad for at some point?
Oh, no. That was a different game. I forgot what that one was called.
That wasn't track and field?
Track and field 2 was it was made by Konami. It was just
it had like the long jump or the triple jump or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. But there was one, I forgot what it was called off the top of my head, but there was one that Nintendo made that had the pad.
Okay.
It kind of looked like a twister pad, and you had
right.
pressure sensitive.
It was one of the first like peripherals. Like the power glove and all that other stuff that they threw in there. I remember right around the same time, 86, 87 probably was when I got the Nintendo for the first time.
Every kid had them back then, I think.
Yeah, and we had, in my house, we had an Atari. We had a Tandy color computer.
Oh, yeah.
We played, what was the one game on that? Underground Canyon Climber?
That sounds like familiar, yeah.
It was kind of like a Super Mario Brothers type game. And I remember playing with my brother Cameron, who you know pretty well.
Yeah, he's been on my show a couple times.
And my brother John. We used to play like Mario Brothers, obviously,
right?
But there was a game called Legendary Wings. I don't know if
I remember that one too. Yep,
that was a big one. We played that one constantly, just for hours. So it's really something that I always look back on. Finally, Cameron has different memories than I do. I remember him being able to play the game.
Yeah.
And he insists that I never allowed him to play the game.
And that's what he would tell me, too, that you were kind of like hoarding it, and then he would feel so special whenever he got a chance to touch the controllers.
But it was a great way to spend time together and kind of bond as brothers or whatever.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you had something similar.
Yeah, it was both. It was nice because whenever we were feeling and there were games that we could compete against each other, and there were games where we could help each other out. And so
I don't remember there being a lot of helping out games on the Nintendo.
Games like Contra, if you remember that one.
Okay, yeah.
There's two guys running through the jungle.
BA. I have no idea what game that is.
So you would run through the jungle, shooting enemies and stuff, Atari Warrior, stuff like that. Mostly they were like shooting games where you'd be on the same team.
Right.
But most of the sports games, you would be competing against each other.
So how did that initial experience with the Nintendo? I mean, was that your first video game experience? Was that your first system in the house?
So my parents got my grandfather, my dad's dad, an Atari 2600 when I was 3. So this was 1981. And so I've been playing video games since as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
I don't remember a time in my life without them.
Right.
And so we, it's like a family tradition. We would go to my grandparents' house. They live one town over in Cheshire. We would go to their house every Sunday night. And so while we were there, we would play Atari games. And I remember playing 3-player games, me, my dad, my grandfather playing Warlords and all these really super old games together.
Right.
So that was kind of how
my line is beating your line.
Yeah, exactly. I have more blocks on my side than you.
Exactly.
But very simple stuff, but that's all we knew. That was the pinnacle of technology at the time. So
I remember Pitfall being like it's a graphic marvel.
Yes, smooth scrolling
it
graphics.
It had 3 colors.
You can actually tell it's a person.
Right.
So that kind of blossomed into our love for Nintendo and why we kind of hit the ground running when we got our Nintendo.
So have you gone along with the systems as they've come along?
Absolutely. I remember doing chores. My brother and I would do chores and earn money so that we can get the Super Nintendo on the day it was released.
That's the best system.
Yeah, and we had a chart with how much money we earned, and then my father ordered it from the Sears catalog, like pre-ordered it so that it would come on the day of release.
Wow.
And we were like, our friends loved us because we had everything,
Oh yeah,
Point blank.
whatever kid in the neighborhood was first to get that.
For sure.
I remember the kid down the street from us was the first one in the neighborhood to get it. And
You're like a hero.
I hope he doesn't listen to this, and if he does, I hope his parents don't, because he opened his Christmas present way early.
Ooh.
And he would sneak it out of the wrapping paper and out of the box.
Sneaky.
and we all, I think we all did. We beat Super Mario World before Christmas.
That's crazy. That's some ninja skills right there. Holy
yeah,
cow.
right, yeah. But it's one of those things where it just draws everybody together.
Yeah.
Like even if you're not playing outside, which is still something that people should do more than they probably do.
Yep.
It does get people together enjoying something as a group. I remember a Street Fighter was another one.
Street
that
Fighter
that
2,
was
favorite
big,
in my house as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Used to go over to my friend's house and play that for forever.
Mm-hmm.
And have you strictly been Nintendo all along, or
Well,
you pick up the Sony stuff? Or
Yeah, so at first we were Nintendo. It was Nintendo,
Yeah.
and then Super Nintendo. We kind of missed the Genesis, but then we went back and we got a Genesis. And I've always been kind of console agnostic.
Yeah.
I've never really played favorites.
Master System too? Or?
Master System, not so much. I had a friend that had it, but it always just seemed like a cheap copy of the Nintendo.
That's
There
what
weren't
it
a
was.
lot of good
It
games.
was
for
Altered Beast and
It's like a stripped down version of Sonic the Hedgehog and a couple of other things. But yeah, I was never too interested in that. I kind of went back and played some of those games, but didn't really.
Genesis had some really good titles.
A lot of
on it,
fantastic titles on that. Yeah,
I can't believe how strong Sonic still is as a character.
still
Just
going as a
everywhere.
franchise.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's a TV show now too.
Yep.
Okay, so at what point did you go from just playing these games, enjoying the time with your brother and whoever else you were playing with, to really noticing that these games had music to them and being drawn toward that?
So they say that necessity is the mother of invention. And my parents, well, at least my mom, my dad not so much. My mom was very conservative.
Okay.
She still is very conservative. My brother and I used to love MTV. We were always just into music. We loved synth pop. We loved all the stuff that was out back then. It was around maybe 1986, 87. We had a Nintendo for a couple years or whatever. We're sitting in the living room watching some videos on MTV. My mom walks in. There's a woman putting on pantyhose. This is too
Scandal.
risque. Yeah, exactly. She shuts off the TV and says, "No more MTV."
Wow.
Suddenly, my brother
That was
and
the
I,
only way to get music for a while there.
exactly.
Yeah.
Unless you're listening to the radio,
Right.
but so
Well, it's the same 8 songs over and over.
exactly.
And over again.
So suddenly, my brother and I are left without music, and I needed something to fill that gap.
Yeah.
And there's music playing out of my Nintendo. And fortunately, I had a really nice stereo system that I learned how I can hook my Nintendo up through the stereo. And the stereo was really cool. It was kind of made for dubbing cassette to cassette or to like record to cassette. It had all this cool stuff on it, and it had like an input bar on it.
Now, some people who are hearing this may not be familiar with the sort of technology that video and sound were played through in the mid-'80s. So when you say you hooked up your Nintendo sound system to a stereo,
Yep.
that's a big deal then. Because, I mean, the TVs, these old CRTs, you probably, if I had to guess, maybe a 22-inch CRT TV, something like that, with one single mono speaker, most likely.
Yep.
So where you went and found a way to patch the music over to stereo sound, I just turned the volume down. So I played a lot of games never hearing
No
the
music.
music.
Yeah.
Except for Top Gun. I remember turning the volume
That had a great soundtrack.
way up for Top. That was just for the missile explosions.
Oh, yeah.
Because they had a really deep bassy sound to
Yep.
them. So that's got to change that experience
It did.
entirely.
It did quite a bit. And so what I would do is record these Nintendo soundtracks to cassette tape.
Oh, okay.
So, and then I would throw it in my Walkman.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
while my parents were really into doo-wop
Okay.
and a lot of 50s stuff. Like they were listening to old music even when I was young,
Yeah.
music that was old to them. And I wasn't really a big fan of it. So
Yeah.
I would put my headphones on in the car and I would listen to my own stuff. And so I would listen to these Nintendo soundtracks and I would go through all the games that I owned and be like, well, all right, this is all the music I have. But the glorious thing was that we could rent games, and then I would rent games, record their soundtracks, and then I would be able to keep the soundtracks
That's
after
called piracy now.
Kind of. With sound, it wasn't really a precedent back then.
Reel-to-reel piracy.
So I would listen to the soundtracks for games that I wasn't even playing anymore, and so I would be more familiar with the game's music than I would with the games themselves. And then that just kind of blossomed. When the Super Nintendo came out, that was in stereo, and I could finally get a full stereo effect coming out of and I had the Game Boy, and I could hook up the headphones to the stereo, and I could
the jump ahead from the original NES to the Super Nintendo, I think, is still one of the best generation to generation jumps that even today. Like that was the perfect home gaming console
of the time
for me, all time. Like there were so many great games, and the graphics still hold up, I think, pretty well today.
For sure.
So being able to get that new technology and get that new sound, because it went from, like, I don't know a lot about video game music, and I don't know a lot about the technology that they used to create it, but I know that there was a huge jump in the sound processing between the old 8-bit to the 16-bit system.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what was that? Well, as somebody who was really a consumer of the music, did that change your experience and how you went about, like, almost collecting the music?
Yeah, I mean, I fell in love with the Super Nintendo sound system.
Yeah.
Because with the Nintendo, you had a limited amount of channels, 5 total channels, one of which could only create white noise. The other one was only samples.
Oh, really?
So you only really had 3 instruments, 2 square waves and a triangle wave. With the Super Nintendo, you got 8 channels total.
Yeah.
And all of them could be used for tones, for music.
Okay.
Plus, the developers could sample instruments, kind of like MIDI, like a keyboard sampler. And so each game had its own musical palette, its own set of instruments.
Right.
So no 2 games really sounded the same. So where you might get a lot of similarities in sound and timbre from the NES, with the Super Nintendo, it was like listening to different genres. You could emulate classical music, you could emulate jazz fusion, you could do rock and metal and rap. So it opened up my musical palette a lot more just by listening to different genres of music and video games.
Yeah.
And then kind of as I got older and more back into what I like to call popular music or radio music, you know, I was able to recognize these genres without even knowing what they were called because I was so familiar with them in the video game realm.
It's funny because, like, I remember specifically on the Super Nintendo, as far as music goes, the old NBA basketball games were the first time I remember hearing recognizable pop music in a video game.
It's like hip hop and scratches.
Yeah, it was.
All sorts of cool stuff.
And that was, I probably didn't appreciate it at the time because, you know, teenager who you know,
just give me to the game.
Right, exactly. But look, like that one, and was it Chrono Trigger or Chrono Cross?
Chrono Trigger was on the Super Nintendo.
Okay, so Chrono Trigger, then I remember having in my mind, and I haven't played it in 20 some years probably, but I remember that just having a sweeping score to it.
That is still revered as one of the best soundtracks to a game,
and it's
ever
one of
made.
the most perfect games I remember playing.
Yeah.
So the Super Nintendo was not just a leap forward as far as gameplay and graphics and everything, but for sound too. So did that impact your relationship with gaming, or was it more of you, because you said you were getting back into pop music around the same time? So how did you kind of take that appreciation that you had gained for the video game music, keep it moving forward, while also sort of assimilating back into pop music?
I think I had an experience that was backwards from a lot of people. So I think a lot of people that grew up with radio-friendly or pop music, that's the kind of video game music they would more gravitate to. For me, it was opposite. So a lot of this music, a lot of this electronic and dance and a lot of these like sine wave tones and all the stuff that I grew up with, I ended up gravitating more towards when I got back into pop music. So techno became a big thing for me.
Okay.
I'm a huge fan of like 80s and 90s industrial music.
Okay.
Because they mix lots of crazy electronics with acoustic instruments, and it's kind of like a blend between it's like video games but enhanced.
Yeah.
So and I've always really been drawn to like dark aggressive music anyway. Not so much like heavy metal, but more like dark aggressive electronic music. So that kind of fit the tone there. And then there were a lot of games on the Super Nintendo and the Genesis that had that same kind of sound. So they kind of bridged the gap.
Yeah. Now I know, like, we're talking about an era of video games here for the most part that predates the internet.
Yeah.
Or at least popular internet, accessible internet, you know. But on your podcast, VGMbassy, one of the things that I find so fascinating about the episodes I've listened to is, you know, the composers, when these things were composed, where they came from. So is this something that you've had to go back and find out about this music that you grew up listening to? Or were you going out of your way to learn these things at a time where it wasn't necessarily as readily available as it would have been today?
Never mind readily available. I don't think it was available back when I was a kid. I remember there was one composer by the name of Yuzo Koshiro who was kind of like the only quote-unquote like composer star in the U.S. Simply because he was so popular in Japan that he would actually have his name on the title screen, music composed by Yuzo Koshiro.
Oh, okay.
And he did like Streets of Rage.
Oh yeah, I know that game.
So like really sort of like, and the music he wrote for these games were extremely contemporary and reflected what was being played in clubs in Japan and the US at the time.
Okay.
So he was kind of promoted as being like a really good music maker. But other than that, most of the other games, I had no idea who made them. And I might be able to see, oh, hey, this game sounds like this game, and this game maybe uses the same kind of instruments that this game did, and kind of piece them together and say, oh, maybe the same person worked on that, but I would have no access to their names. So going back and the dawn of the internet and the information age and being able to have access to all of this information suddenly gave context to all of that nostalgia I had for this music, and I just dove headfirst into it. It was so fantastic.
So I gather there's a relatively large community, mostly online, I guess, being able to connect people from all over the world that sort of grew up with the same passion for this, what would, I guess, be typically thought of as sort of this really niche genre.
Yeah.
And I learned in a previous interview with the Norwalk Video Game Symphony Orchestra that to call video game music a genre is not really fair.
Correct. I agree with that.
But I'm just curious, like, being able to connect with people who had similar experiences or have a similar enjoyment for something that is such a fringe thing to people who grew up listening to pop music.
Mm-hmm.
How has that impacted your enjoyment of the music, or been able to find new stuff, or what's that been like, being able to connect with everybody?
Yeah, I feel like, I had an experience with the internet that a lot of people probably shared, and that is feeling alone in your interest and then suddenly finding a huge community of people.
Yeah.
And so there was what we call in the community the grandfather of video game music podcasts, which we abbreviate as VGM, which is where the VGMbassy comes for. And so the grandfather of VGM podcasts is called Legacy Music Hour. And they were kind of the guys that innovated listening to video game music on a show and kind of talking about it. So a huge community built around that particular show. I kind of learned about them like maybe about halfway through their run. Okay. And I became a big listener, but not so much a participant in the community. And then they announced that they were going to stop making shows. Yeah. And that left this huge void. So I used to do college radio at UNH.
Oh, okay.
And so I felt like between my passion for video game music and having experience on a microphone and really enjoying it and kind of missing not being able to do it anymore, I was like, maybe I can fill this space. Maybe not be as big as Legacy Music Hour was, but at least kind of contribute my own knowledge to the internet. I had a buddy by the name of Mike Levy who I discovered his game review videos online, recognized some of the locations from his video as being right down the street from me. I was like, oh, this kid must be local.
Okay.
So I found him on Facebook and I messaged him.
That's such a weird coincidence.
Yeah, I'm like, hey, dude, I'm a big game fan. I saw your videos. I really like them. I'm in Hamden, and he's like, oh, I'm in Hamden too. We found out we lived like 5 minutes away from each other.
Oh, that's funny.
Crazy coincidence. So we started hanging out a little bit, and I was like, I didn't have the idea for the video game music podcast when I met him.
Yeah.
But about 4 months later, that's when Legacy Music Hour stopped. And I was trying to think, I was like, maybe I could do a solo show, maybe not. And then he kind of popped into my brain, and I was like, he's got a good personality, he's got a great voice. I've hung out with him and his friends, and they would talk about video game music too. Maybe he's got enough of an interest. So I remember texting him. I was at a New Year's party with my family, and I just remember texting him, and he was all for it. And so, we got together, and less than a month later, we put out our first episode of Pixel Tunes Radio, which was my first video game music podcast.
Right.
And that went on for 4 years, 104 episodes.
Oh, wow.
So through that time, a community built around our show.
Right.
Other video game music podcasts popped up. Same kind of thing. Unknowing of what we were doing, they were trying to fill that void too.
Sure.
So all these podcasts are coming together to fill a void. And we were all kind of insular. We didn't really communicate with each other much.
Yeah.
Started having the ideas to reach out to these video game podcast hosts and doing crossover episodes. I'll be on your show, you be on my show.
Right.
Mostly
it's still the best sales model.
Well, exactly. To get that kind of cross-pollination of listeners. And we found out through doing that we all really like each other. And we all really like hanging out together. And everybody's got such this like positive vibe. Everybody's just friendly to each other and wants to help each other out. There's none of these like gatekeeping, like video game fans on the internet tend to get a really negative stereotype sometimes. You need to like things the way I like it.
Everything on the internet.
True. The toxic fandom.
Stereotype.
And I've really yet to find any individual out there in this music community that we've kind of formed that I'm really like, oh, I wish they didn't exist, or they need to be banned or something like that. It's been a very positive experience. And so we all kind of do all these shows together and guest on each other's shows and then do our own thing. And if somebody needs to, like a video game music track they want to play on their podcast and they can't find it, we'll help them out. So it's just great little community that's kind of developed over the years.
How is the accessibility of music, especially video game music, change the way that people listen to it or are able to find it?
I think it's helped people gain more of an appreciation for it, and the fact that it's easy to find now, so you can kind of figure out which kind of music you like. My taste when I was a kid is I had to like whatever I could get my hands on, whatever was available at the rental store, whatever was on my shelf that I could kind of record the music from. But the entirety of video game music is available to everybody now almost instantly via YouTube or some forums. So it really gives everybody a chance to kind of gain their own area of expertise in video game music. So different podcasts they'll do different shows on different topics, but if you kind of like use or look at any individual video game music podcast as a whole, you're going to see it trend towards maybe more Japanese RPGs or maybe more Western composed computer systems or maybe, one thing or the other. So everybody's going to have their own kind of niche of fill it in with the common stuff as well.
Do you find that as far as the actual music is concerned, that you tend to be drawn more to a certain type of game that music is composed for? Or is the music so kind of just not game genre specific that doesn't really matter? Like, I'm thinking like platformers tend to have sort of upbeat kind of looping music, whereas like an RPG will have more of a full orchestration and more of a classical music kind of feel to it. Have you noticed?
Yeah, for sure. And that's not to say that every single RPG has a sweeping orchestral soundtrack. There are outliers for sure, but I've found that there are certain genres of game where I might be like, maybe I'm not going to listen to that one. I'm pretty sure just based on the artwork and the style that I see from the screenshots, I'm probably not going to enjoy that game so much.
Okay.
But then other games where there's like, it's pixel art and it's like a sci-fi dystopian world, I know it's going to have that like gritty, aggressive kind of retro sound that I'm really going to enjoy. So I'll kind of gravitate towards those. And the good thing about the community being so big is that maybe there is a Japanese RPG out there. Somebody knows my tastes in music and they're going to say, hey man, you should listen to that RPG, even though you might not normally do it, and I'll listen to it, and it'll be a great one.
Do you find yourself drawn more to like the Japanese composers, or is there more a different region that tends to push out the music that you like?
I tend to actually enjoy what we consider Western composers more, UK and American. I mean, I really do like classic Japanese compositions. Modern Japanese composition really does trend more towards like orchestral and symphonic, and I'm not a huge fan of orchestral and symphonic. I will listen to it, but it's not my go-to.
Right.
But the way I have my show set up, my podcast, is that I have a different guest on, kind of like you. I have a different guest on every episode, and I call it the VGMbassy because I envision myself as like the prime VGM minister, and all of my guests are called VG ambassadors.
Right.
And so they share with me their own video game music culture.
Right.
So so being a solo show, I try not to pigeonhole the kind of music that I'm playing. I want them to bring their own tastes. I don't want them to say, Ed, I think you're really going to enjoy this music. That's why I'm bringing it on the show. No, I want you to introduce me to something completely new and different. So I'm exposed to a lot more things that I normally wouldn't listen to, and very in depth because I'm doing a podcast about it. So I have to kind of experience it as a whole and then edit it and listen to it a million times. So I find myself growing to appreciate more music outside the genres that I would normally listen to.
Have you found that you've been introduced to a specific composer that you didn't know about before, but just kind of comes up again and again and again that you're drawn
to? A few here and there, I mean, there's a composer by the name of Tim Fallon, which is I didn't know about him when I was a kid, and then growing up, he did a lot of the music for like Silver Surfer and Pictionary, and just kind of weird games that didn't review very well.
Okay.
But so his soundtracks were amazing. He had this like 70s prog rock sound that just, and he could make a Nintendo sound unlike anything you've ever heard before. And so that's kind of, he like became my favorite. Like he's my like, Billy Joel or Michael Jackson or whoever. He's my superstar right there. Right. And so my love for that kind of music, and I think the Western composers, kind of grew out of my introduction to him. And so I was introduced to him through, other people and not discovered necessarily by myself.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I enjoy so much about doing this show is being able to hear people talk about the stuff that I've never heard about or know very little about, get introduced to, and kind of pick up stuff as I go.
Yeah.
And, oh, there's something new I can kind of delve into a little bit. Now, you kind of talked a little bit, kind of glanced over the change in the style and composition of music that has sort of accompanied the growth of the technology that goes into video games. Because, I mean, you started with just a few available sounds, mostly beeps on like a ColecoVision or an Atari or something like that. And now you've got world-renowned composers like Hans Zimmer getting behind these video game projects and composing full scores as if they're doing, the next Batman movie or whatever it is.
Right.
As the music has evolved, has your appreciation for it, your enjoyment of it evolved with it? Have you found yourself drawn more to the nostalgic games, or is your taste growing along with what is being put into the games today?
I'll say that as a community kind of hive mind, the general opinion is that the scores for these AAA titles, like the newest, like Tomb Raider and Uncharted, and all these like
Red Dead Redemption, and stuff like that,
all these giant multi-million-dollar games, the soundtracks are so un-video game like that they don't really suit our tastes so much.
I see.
And there are a few, like Red Dead Redemption 2 that just came out. It's more of a Western theme. It does have less of that kind of movie-ish score to it, so that's kind of an outlier there.
But a game like Skyrim, where it's all
yeah,
sort of ambient music and just more supposed to set a tone more than really entertain.
It's such a far cry from the electronics and the very pure tones that we grew up with. And I'm not saying that those games soundtracks are universally disliked. There are lots of people out there that appreciate, and it's mainly I want to say mainly younger folks who didn't grow up with the Super Nintendo and kind of maybe onboarded with the PlayStation 2, where live streaming audio with real instruments, that was their introduction to video game music. But I want to say, at least in our community, which is mainly made up of 30 to 40-year-olds, unless you are already a huge fan of orchestral video or orchestral movie soundtracks and have that to relate to it, there's not a lot of love for those soundtracks that are out right now. So mainly the games that are coming out now are the throwback games, the indie games.
Yeah. God, there's so many of them.
Yeah, and that's a huge burgeoning genre right now, retro throwback games. And so mainly those will be kind of harken back to the original Nintendo or Genesis sound, but composed with modern tools with a more modern aesthetic. So that's really the kind of stuff that I'm enjoying right now, because I love the combination of, it's like listening to my childhood music, but kind of grown up with my current
remastered
tastes.
childhood.
Exactly. Yeah.
Have you noticed any trend? Like, I'm specifically thinking of the Nintendo Switch right now. I don't know if you have one, if you've used it.
Yep.
If you spend any time on, was it the eShop, the Nintendo eShop, you're inundated with these tiny little independent projects, like $1 for this game, $3 for this game. Oh, this one's free today. And I've tried more of them than I probably should have. It's just too easy to click buy for 99 cents or whatever.
Right.
But one of the things that I've noticed from all of them, especially a few of the titles that I've found, like I think it's Earthlock is one of them, which is sort of an action style RPG. And I'm spacing on the name of it, but I'll think of it. Old Man's Journey.
I've heard of it. I haven't played it, but I've seen it. Yeah.
And all these other games that I've tried, one of the things, like the gameplay itself is wildly different, very inventive a lot of the time. And some of them, it's not even, the character seems unimportant. It's the environment that you manipulate in interesting new ways. So game genre aside, what they all seem to have in common is they spend a lot of time and energy creating an interesting and appropriate score in whatever style it is. So do you think that this new readily available independent publishing platform like the Nintendo Switch has created has helped in the development of new music for video games, or have you found any impact whatsoever on that? It seems like there's certainly more spaces for composers to be putting their stuff out there.
Yeah, and with the amount of games that are coming out, there's more room for experimentation. And
so much.
Yeah, you're not going to get just these traditional, 4/4 signature, poppy, hummable video game soundtracks. You're going to get music that blends into, a character's traversing through a swamp. So you're going to get the bubbles and the crickets and the frogs, but then you're going to get violins and maybe a gamelan that kind of like all blend into the sound effect that normally you wouldn't really get on an older video game or like maybe not a AAA title, because everybody's trying to be big and bombastic with the AAA titles. I think, it's a boon for video game music lovers too, because now we have, well, it's a blessing and a curse, because we've got so much to dig through now that we're always afraid that we're going to miss out on some hidden gem.
Yeah.
But it's great for podcasters like me, because I can take these $2-3 games and hopefully introduce somebody to an amazing video game soundtrack that from a game they probably never heard of before, because it just slips by their radar. I'm kind of like you. I'm like a game hoarder for Steam on the PC.
Okay,
I
yeah.
just passed my 700 game mark on Steam.
Oh
I'm
my
like,
God.
this is over the course of like a decade, but it's crazy how many games there are available for so little money.
Yeah.
And there's so much to explore. And
I mean, I paid $60 for Joust once upon a time.
and now a game like that would probably cost you 50 cents.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's about how much they put into development of the console version of that game too.
Right. There's just so much out there, and it's so much fun to go picking through it.
Yeah.
And as a podcaster, it really changes the way that I look at games. So whenever I play a new game, I'm having fun. I'm beating up guys, or I'm on this journey through God knows where.
Right.
But I'm also turning my ear towards the soundtrack and going, hey, this sounds really good in the game, but I have to listen to it a different way. Does it sound good by itself?
Yeah,
Will it work in the context of a podcast for somebody who's never seen these visuals before, isn't on the same journey I'm on?
Yeah.
And so a great video game soundtrack might not necessarily be a soundtrack that's appropriate for a podcast without putting somebody to sleep, you know?
What are your thoughts on the current state of mobile gaming music? Like, you can download whatever on your phone and have the earphones in, or if you're my kids, take the earphones off and turn the volume all the way up anyway while I'm trying to do something else. That doesn't bother me at all, clearly. But I mean, the soundtracks that are available on mobile games are anything from, like you were saying before, just bubbly noises to techno to dance hall stuff. Like it's pretty wild.
Yeah.
But the mixes are geared for somebody who's got headphones in and is sitting in probably a crowded environment.
Yeah.
So they're a little bit overstimulating quite often.
Right. It's full of very short, frenetic, catchy hooks.
Frenetic is a good word for it. Yeah.
And there are, fortunately, I'm really into mobile gaming.
Yeah.
I've got, on my iPhone, and I've got an iPad Pro, which is great for gaming because it'll play anything that's out there super fast. And a lot of the other video game music podcasters in the community, being older people, everybody kind of has this stigma with mobile gaming that, it's pay to win and you got to like earn gems and blah, blah, blah. And yes, there is a lot of those types of games out there, but there are also a lot of games that are like the indie games that you see on the Switch or the PC that kind of go unnoticed because so many people just kind of brush over mobile gaming as a whole instead of kind of sifting through and trying to find the good stuff.
There's some great, like especially puzzle games. There's a lot of great puzzle games for mobile.
Yeah. And so on Pixel Tunes, we had a gentleman by the name of Matt Creamer, otherwise known as Norin Rad, who's created these amazing soundtracks for mobile games in the style of like Sega Genesis and all, and Super Nintendo and PlayStation, and just fantastic soundtracks that that people would otherwise have completely ignored. And after airing that podcast episode, so many of our listeners were like, oh my God, I can't believe music like this is on a mobile game.
Yeah.
And they all like flocked to his Bandcamp to download his stuff.
Oh, that's
but still
awesome.
Won't play the mobile games. So, so I'm like, fine, don't play the mobile games. I'll sift through it. I'll get all the music and then I'll show you what's out there. And then maybe you'll try the game just to listen to the music while you're playing. But I do feel like it's an unfairly maligned platform for games, and there is a lot of good stuff out there. Just kind of you have to dig through this crust of all the popular microtransaction-y stuff first.
The microtransaction is like
it's horrible. It's horrible.
It's hands down the worst thing ever to happen to humanity.
Yeah. And I'm sure. I mean, you have kids. I have kids. Those kids are growing up thinking that this is normal.
Thinking it's
for
normal.
them.
Yeah.
And so I constantly have my 7-year-old coming up to me, Daddy, can you buy these gems for me? And I'm like, no. Yeah. And I'm trying to train him to realize that I'm okay with spending money on it if it's a permanent unlock new levels. Unlock.
Hey, Dad, can I have this game? No, it says in-app purchases underneath that.
Yeah,
no, you can't.
exactly. If you're buying like a consumable, like a gem that'll just get you to the next level faster,
right?
Totally not worth it. If you're going to get some actual content for your money, maybe I'll think about it.
So you bring up something else that I thought would be fun to touch on. You're a father. I'm a father. We both grew up playing games with our siblings in our houses. your son has appeared on your podcast.
Yep.
He knows a few things about video
Sure
games.
does.
What's it been like for you being able to sort of pass on your passion for video games and video game music to another generation and have him share that at a level where he's actually going on your podcast?
It's fantastic.
And speaking intelligently about this stuff at 7 years old.
It's fantastic. So both of my kids, I got my older one, who's 13 now, into video games through this PlayStation 2 game called Katamari Damacy. And I thought it would be really easy for him because you just use the 2 analog sticks to roll this ball around, and you kind of collect things as you roll through the world and get bigger and bigger, and pretty soon you're like the size of the planet. And it's like, there's this giant kind of sequence that you go through. And he really enjoyed it, and then he started playing that stuff. But then slowly he got into Minecraft and like what kids of his age were getting into.
Yeah.
And now he plays Fortnite and like a lot of the stuff that I really, I can't see myself playing.
Right. I tried Minecraft. I can't.
And I'm the same way. But Logan, on the other hand, really kind of gravitated toward the stuff that I was liking. He really took a shine to Mario and the Mushroom Kingdom characters, which Eddie never did. And so I started introducing him to more stuff. And Logan, like, he wants to be a scientist when he grows up. He's got this engineer's brain. He thinks in 3 dimensions. He blows me away with the things that he knows and just understands. And so I'm trying to cultivate that with video games and introducing him to games that have moving parts and that you can build things and create things. And so playing video games with him is like he looks at games through a different filter than I do. And it's so cool seeing him as the age I was when I was playing Super Mario Brothers. And then he's got these, giant 3-dimensional objects and worlds to play with. And he's just like throwing himself into them and developing his own taste in music. And so, he knows that I love video game music. And so he's through me, kind of learned that that's a very important part of the art of video games. And so he'll be listening to a game soundtrack, or I'll be playing a game and he'll come downstairs and he'll be, he'll listen and he'll be like, this is a really good track. Do you want to play this on your podcast? Like, I would love to do this. And then he's got his own little genres. Like, he really likes marble mazes, and he likes to watch marble mazes on YouTube and stuff.
Like Marble Madness.
And Marble Madness. So there are games like modern versions of Marble Madness that are on the Switch, that are on all sorts of different. So he came up with the idea to do a podcast based on marble games. And so now we're researching all the marble games and the soundtracks for marble games and taking his interest and making it into a whole new show. So it's like, as a 7-year-old, like...
Oh, that's amazing.
I feel blessed that I can provide him with the opportunity to have a creative outlet for the things that he's interested in and be able to present it to people that are like 30, 40 years old. Here's this little 7-year-old kid that's educating adults on their... Oh, it's such a cool
listened
feeling.
to your Tetris episode with him talking about Tetris. I was taken back to the living room when I was 10 years old, back in the mid-'80s, playing Tetris with my mom. And I had like a lot of the same thoughts, a lot of the same memories, just sitting there. It's really incredible. That's really got to be great to have that. Like, because my kids aren't interested in any of that stuff. They like to play. They like Minecraft. They like the new Smash Brothers on the Switch.
I play that too.
I'd never played one before, so it's fun. I can't. My old eyes can't keep up with all the
It's chaotic. It's chaotic for sure.
But it's really cool to be able to have that bonding time. Like when you were a kid bonding with your brother, now being able to do that with your own children is got to be amazing. I enjoy it. Not the Minecraft part, but I like and the other thing that I've noticed is the Mario Brothers characters have become this indelible thing that's now 3 and 4, almost 4 generations in.
True.
Who saw that coming?
I know, this little Italian plumber, and suddenly he's like the most recognizable video game character in the world.
And everybody loves the Mario Brothers.
Yeah. And so many different genres, whether it's racing or sports or action platforming.
RPG, too.
He's in everything. So, and it's crazy. And they're so wholesome and so recognizable that kids are still drawn to it. Nintendo did a really good job at creating a world that people of all ages can enjoy.
And it's just challenging enough to be enjoyable, but not throwing the controller at the screen.
Right. I like my 7-year-old beat Mario Odyssey. Like he was able to do it, and
I haven't done that yet.
Exactly. I mean, but they also leave all these optional things, like all these collectibles that adults can go through and really challenge themselves with trying to 100% the game.
Right.
But the little kids can also have the satisfaction of beating a game, going through like this kind of more narrow pathway that's more on their age level or challenge level. So
do you have a favorite game of all time, or are there just too many?
I do. It's an old Nintendo game by the name of Bionic Commando.
Oh my god!
You remember that?
I do. The shooting claw arm thing. Yeah.
I rented that when I was a kid, and I was like, "What is going on?" I had no idea what I was doing, and just kind of wandering around these levels because there's a map. It's not a linear game like Super Mario Bros.
Right.
And I remember just randomly, right before I had to return the game to the video store, randomly getting to the end boss of one of the levels and be like, oh my God, this game does end. Like there are like stages you can go through and beat. And so at that point, it was like ending a movie on a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Like I needed to figure out what happens after I get to this like boss area. So I asked my parents for it for Christmas that year, and fortunately they were wise enough to get it for me. So and then from then on, I kind of played it so much that I really perfected like my style of play. So that's remained my de facto favorite game of all time, just both from nostalgia and gameplay.
Yeah, I remember that game. That was that one and Low G Man were two that I played.
Oh yeah, I never played that one, but
Yeah.
I'm familiar with it. Yeah,
it was around the same time.
Yeah,
probably
very unique methods of playing both of them.
88. Yeah, for that time, very. What about as far as like the soundtrack goes? Is there a game with the soundtrack you just can't get enough of?
Well, there's that composer Tim Fallon that I was just talking about. Excuse me. So, God, I mean, there really are so many game soundtracks out there that it's not even funny. But anything that Tim Fallon has done, I'm a really big fan of. And his career spanned from, because he's British, so he spanned from the early, like ZX Spectrum, Commodore 64 in the UK, games that never really came out in the US. He had his roots there, and then started working on the Nintendo and then the Super Nintendo, and then he stopped composing like around the Dreamcast PSP era. So he's got
Dreamcast
this
has some good games on it.
Yeah, it did. So there's this huge body of work kind of spanning all of these different sound systems and technological eras of music.
Yeah.
And it's all just fantastic. So I would say his entire career is kind of my favorite. And then there are just so many like obscure like visual novels that came out on these like Japanese computer systems, like the PC-98, the Sharp X68000 that never came out over here. And they're like unplayable to Americans because it's all Japanese text, like a choose your own adventure kind of game. But they just have these phenomenal FM soundtracks that are musically so proficient and so well done. And it's tough because you can't really introduce that kind of stuff to people without any sort of context.
Right.
So for somebody who's not a video game music fan, you're not going to give it the time of day. You really have to kind of it's like appreciating wine for that. That's like the real deep hardcore video game music stuff.
Okay.
So, but I would consider like those genres of games to be in my favorite realm.
Okay. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So before I let everybody go, I always like to ask for a recommendation for something new, something interesting that maybe you've experienced recently that you think other people would enjoy. It doesn't have to be video game related. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. From anywhere. So if you have something that you think people might enjoy checking out.
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep it in the video game realm because I think this is a good for those who aren't into gaming that much. There's this game called Gris, Gris.
Okay.
And I think that's Greek for gray. But it is one of those games that likes to prove that gaming really is art. There's always been this debate whether or not video games are art. All of the graphics and images are hand-painted watercolor. The soundtrack is just sublime. It is so gorgeous. The gaming, it's like a side-scrolling platformer, but It's mostly kind of puzzly. There's not a lot of
Okay.
challenge. It's very easy to get through. The concept of the game is to just go through and experience and listen to the music and see the images.
Yeah.
And it's about a woman who wakes up and everything is gray. And as she goes through this world, she collects new colors. And every time she gets a new color, it adds to the landscape. And
okay.
new watercolors appear on the landscape. And so every level that you play through is kind of themed through whichever color that you've just grabbed. And by the end of it, you're just going through these absolutely gorgeous, vivid landscapes with this beautiful sweeping soundtrack.
Great.
And
I'm really digging the hand-drawn games these days.
Yeah.
I think that's
there's
just
so
a
much
great
cool
aesthetic.
artistry out there. Yeah.
It's really incredible.
So for people that haven't, you might want to find a gamer, get them to play this game, and then just kind of watch it, because it really is a thing to behold.
What's it on? What system is it
It's
for?
on the Switch. It's on
Okay.
Steam. I think you might be able to get it on PS4 too. But if
Okay.
you have a PC and you have Steam, or you have a kid who has
Right,
Steam,
right.
you can download it. It's not, I think it's $10-15 or
Okay.
something like that. And it's great. I'd recommend it to anybody who just appreciates art in any form, because it's like a moving piece of art.
Yeah. Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I'm going to check that one out. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
How are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling good. And, we've discussed maybe you coming onto my show, and I feel like you've recommended a game to me with a soundtrack that you really appreciate.
A couple of them, yeah.
Yeah, and I did play one of them so far, Oxenfree.
Okay.
And like I said, I had it in my Steam queue among my 700 games. I was trying to get to it. I love the soundtrack. I love the game. So I'm looking forward to exploring that game with you on my show.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to
for sure.
that. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. A sincere thanks to Ed Wilson for a great conversation and a nice stroll down Nostalgia Avenue. It was also great to be able to speak with a friend of my brother's and to learn a little more about something that means so much to him and thousands of other people all over the world. If you're interested in VGM or just getting into conversation with people passionate about their music, make sure to check out the VGMbassy on your favorite podcast service. And since you're on that podcast service anyway, leave a 5-star rating and a glowing review of Table to Stage. Now, I spared you the pre-roll, but all bets are off in post-roll. More ratings mean more people will see the show on their recommended pod lists, and I really enjoy reading them. Also, be sure to check out the Patreon page for occasional additional content and to get all the episodes in advance of release to the to the public. And keep an eye out for a crossover episode where I will appear on the VGMbassy talking about some interesting VGM that I've recently encountered myself. In the spirit of today's episode, I'm going to suggest that everyone with any interest in video games try out the Nintendo Switch. My amazing wife got me one as an anniversary gift once upon a time, and it's a freaking revelation. Games for everyone at every price point, and the portability means you don't have to fight with your own kids over who gets to use the TV while they're playing Minecraft and preventing you from adventuring through Skyrim or the Wastelands. Anyway, this Switch is pretty cool. That's it for now. Until next time, keep creating.